to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, I'm Collett Smart and I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and your host on Raising Teens. I'm also a parent and I'm in the middle of raising my own teens and young adult children. I know that raising teens can be fun and busy, but also terrifying and even lonely. I've experienced all of these emotions, sometimes in the same day. On this podcast, I'm joined by well-known experts, and we chat about some of the most common questions I get asked about raising teenagers in my own work, and even some questions I have myself. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is full of support and practical advice. I love seeing all your questions come in, so each season I focus on some that teachers, parents, and carers have raised. We're all caring for the teens we love so much, so please keep sending in your ideas and questions through my Instagram and Facebook page or via the Hope 1032 podcast webpage, so we can support this generation of teens together. When people experience significant loss, they grieve. Like happiness, anger, anxiety, we all experience grief in our lives. Grief can sometimes be an overwhelming series of emotions that touch us. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross was a Swiss-born American psychiatrist and an author who was a pioneer in the study of death and dying that I teach my undergrad students about. She introduced the concept of the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. However, because grief is a unique experience to every person, newer models include 7 or even 10 stages of grief. I think what is most important to understand is that the stages of grief were never meant to be linear. There's no specific order for grief. Everyone is going to grieve differently. So in this episode, we talk about how to support our teens when they experience the loss of someone they know. Because we're talking about loss and death in this episode, please pause at any time if you need to and come back later again. In this episode, I'm joined by Raewyn Elsegood. Raewyn is a wife and a mother of 3. She is passionate about caring for, empowering, and connecting her community. She has connections in a number of key growth spaces, including Sports Chaplaincy Australia in her role as State Coordinator for New South Wales and ACT, where her team have supported her in growing and caring for 170 sports chaplains across all sports in the state. Raewyn is a company director for Team GEM and finds great joy in empowering tweens and teens as a course developer and presenter. In her spare time, you can find Raewyn writing about the grief journey after the loss of her 19-year-old daughter in 2021. Hello, Raewyn. Thank you so much for joining me on Raising Teens.
It's lovely to be here, Collett.
So, in a lot of my episodes, I like to tell my listener how I know some of the guests. So you and I have a bit of a history. Both our daughters went to the same school, and you and I spent quite a bit of time on the side of either an indoor or an outdoor netball court, depending on the season. And that's actually how I got to know you a little bit and learned about your eldest daughter getting married and that you also had a younger son and so on. So, you know, as I spoke in your bio, you're not a stranger to grief. So you're a sports chaplain and you've obviously worked through and supported others through many, many things in their lives, including grief. But I really appreciate that you feel open to talking with us today about your story, because your daughter Amy, who I knew and I sat on the side of the netball court watching, she passed away. And so would you mind telling us a bit about what that has been like and how that is for you?
Yeah, thank you, Collett, for the opportunity. It's not an easy thing to talk about, but it's something that I feel really vulnerable in wanting to talk about to give her life purpose. And I think coming from the perspective of now leading 170 chaplains in New South Wales with Sports Chaplaincy Australia, I understand the value of moving from my very safe, comfortable supporter space where I was the one doing the caring to then having to turn into the supported. And that was a really big deal for me as not just a mum, but in my career path, because we like to think that we have the answers. And then when it happens to you, those answers aren't so clear. So I think with Amy, she was 18 and she had just finished high school with your daughter, gone through COVID, doing the HSC. So you thought they'd already had enough trials. She just established herself, moved out of home, and was really excited to have a full-on purpose with an elite dance career when she noticed extensive bruising on her body that wasn't connected to her dance activities. Went to a doctor and had a blood test, and our lives changed forever in that one moment, because that blood test revealed that she had severe aplastic anemia. And we then had a 7-month journey in hospital with a bone marrow transplant, thinking that she was actually recovering. And we had the joy of having her home for 2 months in that 7-month journey through lockdown. And then she was a virus from within inside her new blood from the bone marrow operation actually caused a virus to come up within and steal her organs one by one, and that landed her back into ICU and ventilated. And at not one time did we think we were going to lose her, but then, 10 days before she passed, we realised that this was a life or death situation. Yeah, she was diagnosed March 2021 and we lost her in October 2021. So we had a 7-month battle with her, and that battle helps us understand why she needed to go to heaven.
Raewyn, people can often be so unsure when they meet up with a friend or a stranger who talks about losing a loved one, especially a child. Sometimes some people say nothing at all because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing. Other times people will blurt out trite phrases, God needed a new flower in his garden or whatever it might be. And it can sometimes be well-meaning, but what did you find the most helpful or supportive in those initial days and months after losing Amy? And is there anything you think people should avoid that could be hurtful?
Yeah, let me go to the avoiding things first, because I think they are the most hurtful and people don't realise they are, because they don't know that to say, I know how you feel is one of the worst things you can say, because grief is so different for everyone. They actually don't, even if they've lost a child as well. So I know how you feel is something I would recommend you highly don't say. Comparing your experience, so even if you have lost someone, and comparing it and thinking you actually know, again, coming back to the we're all different, you don't know. And one of the pet hates I had, and I shouldn't hate as a chaplain anything, but unfortunately things do rattle you a little bit. People would say, let me know what I can do. They don't actually understand that in your grief, you don't know what you need. And for someone to actually say, let me know what I can do, it actually makes the person sound good, but it's actually not terribly helpful. And the biggest thing was receiving flowers. My home looked like a florist shop, and I woke up every morning to the pain of knowing something tragic had happened by just looking at the flowers. So that's not to say don't send flowers, particularly if you're a close family friend or your work, wants to reach out and send something. But if you can think that it's not all about you, and what would your friend that's in this grief actually appreciate receiving, rather than just how it will make you feel like you're doing something.
This is really helpful for me, thinking of people who are grieving, rather than saying, what do you need? But then if that person doesn't need flowers, how would someone have known that something else might have been more helpful for you? What would a person have done in your situation that would have been more helpful?
Yeah, number one, if they're a close friend, they will know you well enough to send something.
Okay.
So you actually need to put yourself in the person's shoes and go, well, what is my friend's love language? What is it that they like so much? How can I help them feel just a little bit better or a little bit distracted? My love language is words of affirmations. So people that knew me well knew that I needed words. I didn't need things. The thing that was most impactful for me was a simple 2-word text, I'm here. That then meant my relationship with them opened up. By them just saying, I'm here, I wanted to respond to that and say, thank you. What I need right now is, because they just opened up the dialogue without any intention of what they could do. And I think, obviously, if you're a close family member or friend, you would just turn straight up. But a lot of my close friends didn't, and then were angst later on that they should have known better. And my advice to them in the future was, if you're a close friend, just turn up. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to say the right things. If you're a close friend, just don't be afraid if I reject you. If you turn up and it's not the right time and I turn you away, doesn't mean I don't like you anymore. I don't need your help. It just means right now, I don't need you. Can you please turn around and go away? The other thing I'd say is, if you didn't know the person previously, but you were just connected loosely to them in a way, it's not your turn right now to help that person. It's actually wiser to stay away and come in when you would normally. So with you and I at the netball court, if that's the only time we saw each other, then that would be where I expect to see you again, not on my front doorstep.
As Raewyn mentioned, grief can look very different for every person and even people in the same family. Sometimes I think we expect that a grieving teen will be sobbing in their bedrooms, but grief for your teen might look like many different physical, behavioral, or even emotional changes. That can even look like anxiety or depression. Although grief can sometimes trigger an underlying mental health condition, grief is a normal and necessary part of the human experience. What we want to be looking out for is when this process impacts their ability to function. So if you're worried about your teen after a few weeks and they're still struggling to go to school or do activities they usually enjoyed, maybe they stopped interacting with people they trust, they're feeling hopeless or numb, or you've noticed their overall eating and sleeping habits are quite different to what they normally have been. Maybe they're engaging in behaviors that are risky or dangerous to themselves or others. That is the time to chat with your GP and ask if you could get further support. For people who don't know you well, not sending flowers and so on, for those people, it's often, are you saying for you it would have been more helpful to hold back a little bit and wait for more natural times when I might bump into you and so on? That would have been more helpful for you.
Absolutely.
So it's quite different for close friends to acquaintances.
Yes. Close family and friends, you worry if they don't reach out in some way, shape or form. But for people that are on that peripheral sideline in your relationship, then waiting, and we'll probably get to that in this conversation, but your grief never goes away. So you actually need people there at all different times for different reasons and waiting for the natural connection.
Okay. And so I think what I'm hearing then from you is that grief will look very different for different people. So grief for you and what you needed would be very different to somebody else I might know who might be grieving. And it's those close people in your life who would know how to respond or you would feel comfortable telling them how they might respond best to you, or, not feeling afraid to turn up and be turned away and so on. But it's going to look very different for different people, perhaps different ages. You have children both here in Australia and overseas. How can we be sensitive to the grief process and the needs of different people in our family or community? Was the grief process very different for you compared to your husband, compared to your younger child and your older child? how did you navigate that in your home?
Oh, with great difficulty.
Okay. Thanks for being honest.
Yeah, I think we are still navigating it 16 months later. It's improving because we're committed to the connection and communication that it's going to take in our relationship to rebuild. Because what I think, unless you've gone through this, you don't understand is that you lose yourself completely in the fog of grief, and you grieve who you used to be, but you've got to wait for the little elements of who you know to come back. And over time in the last year, I've noticed that I thought I'd lost myself completely and I was rebuilding from ground up. But then I've realised through the time that has gone before in this 16 months, there's little essences of who I used to be coming back and refinding and reconnecting with me. But what I think my family needed, you heard me say before that words of affirmation is my love language. We all went to our strengths and our love languages for solace. So I went to words, and all I wanted to do was talk about the daughter that I had lost. But my husband is acts of service and task, and words is his least favourite love language. So he went to his garden and started tending to something he could control and didn't want his wife talking to him about his lost child. My 16, 17-year-old son was going through year 11 and 12 at the time, and he just wanted to live his normal life and not be disturbed, by the grief that was going on at home, and shut himself in that denial box. And I realise now that he hasn't even started to grieve the loss of his sister. And, I need to give that a timeline that has no end as far as supporting as a mother for him, which means I can't push my talk onto either of the men living with me in my home now, which means I have to ask my friends to be there to listen to me. And I had to find a GP and a psychologist that would listen to me and help me sort out my feelings, and to also help me understand to leave my men alone and let them on their own journey and at their own pace. My eldest daughter, who lives in New York, couldn't get here for the funeral or to say goodbye to her sister because of the COVID lockdown. She was on the second plane from New York to Australia in November when our borders opened, but the second flight got her here after the funeral, which meant she was desperate for her and her husband to come and just be a part of our grief. So she turned up, and she was able to contribute in the way we released Amy's ashes. But the really helpful thing that I found was I, as a mother, had to put myself in my own family member's shoes. Even though I was grieving, I couldn't say, I'm worse than you. I had to be able to look at each individual person and go, well, what are they saying to me if I listen long enough? And if I ask them simple, open-ended questions about how they are doing and what they actually need from me and other family members, we will actually understand each other's layers and be able to grow with each other through the grief.
Essentially, as a parent who's grieving, recognizing that your child is likely to grieve very differently from you, and not expecting them to grieve in the same process or the same way as you do is really important. And so do you have advice a little bit more specifically then in that area for parents who are supporting a teen who's grieving the loss of a loved one, a family member, even a friend? If we have people who are listening and they have a teen who's lost a friend, what is your advice for teens, knowing that teens will be quite different?
I think from a mother's heart, we instinctively want to take our own experience and tell them what we know, because that's what we do as parents. We want to guide our children, but in doing that, we're actually forcing them to grieve our way, and we're giving them years' worth of experience they're not prepared for yet. So I suppose my first tip would be, don't tell them what you think they should do. Sit and actually listen to their concerns. And then when and if they want to choose you to be the person they talk to, then respond with open-ended questions that help them think for themselves. My understanding, I have an older teen and young adult now, and he comes to me about once every 8 weeks, sits down on the lounge and just opens up his heart. It will only last for about 20 minutes. So, 20 minutes once every 8 weeks for an 18-year-old male, I'm doing pretty well. But I need to be very careful with how I then respond to him. I need to just listen and say, what is it you actually need from me? And he goes, I just wanted to talk it out. He didn't want how to do it. And I think what I've noticed him do in particular is he's gone to friends for 2 different reasons. He's gone to friends for distraction. So he wanted to just go to the gym, do normal things that a normal 16, 17, 18-year-old boy would want to do, feel normal, fit in with his peer group. And then there was every now and again he would find a male that actually asked him, how are you doing with the loss of your sister? And he would actually respond to that question in the present. And then he would let me know that he really enjoyed a conversation with someone that actually asked.
Incredible.
So friendships, I think, are really pivotal in our teens and for us as parents to understand that maybe the friends will have more of an impact than we will in those discussions.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is how important it is to not feel as though you're failing as a parent if your teen doesn't come and talk with you about their grief. And I think sometimes teens can worry about worrying their parents or burdening their parents so much. Our teens can be quite beautiful in that sense that they don't want to add to their parents' grief. So then, they choose not to talk to their parents. And I love how you give your son and encourage us to give our children permission to talk to other people, including their friends or other role models in their lives. And I think what I also appreciated you talking about is how you spoke about your son going through a period where he just wanted a normal teenage period after his sister passed away. And that's not bad or wrong. Sometimes I think it can be interpreted as they don't care or they're not grieving correctly. And actually for him, he just needed to get through his schooling and it still experienced some of his teen years, and it wasn't the wrong way to grieve. And you seem to embrace that for him. So that's quite a powerful picture then for what parents could do in allowing their teens to feel as though they can grieve in a way that is appropriate to them and they can still have fun. It sounds like that's what your son needed sometimes, and he wasn't made to feel guilty for still having fun.
Yeah. I think I've learnt from talking to other parents who have lost children as well, and the best advice I had been given was someone that had been on the journey 7 years ahead of myself and lost a child. And I asked her about the siblings, and she said she was 10 years down the path, and she said my son only started to grieve 7 years after the death of his sister. So I think that surprised me that it took that long, but it also helped me to understand that I had a lot more patience. After I thought I'd been patient with 16 months, I may have a long way to go yet.
So that really brings me to thinking about how grief might look a year on. A year on is still very fresh in a sense in your grief. But you're also talking about grief continuing, which we do know grief never ends. And so grief is still continuing in a different way. It might look different in 10 years, like it is for your friend. And so we need to recognize that people may be processing their grief quite differently, particularly our teenagers. They may only process it a long time in the future. So what do our teens need then from those around them in that process? For example, in a year after or 2 years or 5 years, what do you think our teens need from us at the different phases of their grief?
Yeah, I think to put it in a nutshell is permission from us to not have a timeline that is our own as a parent. we tend to think they've got different seasons and this season will come to an end. Grief does not come to an end. If there's no beginning, there's no end. So trusting the process and trusting too that there is a village around our children and that village is at work, and sometimes we don't even see it. And the reality of after a year, for me, sitting in this space 16 months later, is this last Christmas was my second Christmas after our loss, and yet it was the hardest. So it actually, your pain doesn't stop and it doesn't get better. If anything, it gets worse the further away you are from the death, because the pain and the reality of the fact they're not coming back. They haven't just gone on a holiday. You know, when I've got a daughter that's moved overseas, I could very easily trick my mind into thinking Amy's just gone to live with her, you know, and COVID's just locked us down and I'll see her in a few years, where I've had to mentally say to myself, you know, I choose to believe that my daughter has passed. And because of my faith, she's in heaven. I have an eternal faithfulness that will help me see her again. But I think with teens, we need to let them take the lead. And I think that's really hard as a parent.
Yeah. And so you just spoke a little bit there about the village, because I know you also work with young people in chaplaincy in New South Wales, particularly netball. What would your advice be then to parents of a teen who doesn't seem to have a village? How do we help those teens?
I think if I look at it from a perspective of, even though we think they don't have a village, they really do. They have friends, even if it's just one friend. It's actually the best friend of the person, of the teen, that will probably be the most helpful. So even if they've only got one friend, there's the beginning of a village. And then they've got your family. And it might not be you they go to, but they may have just spent Christmas with family and they've talked to their auntie or a cousin. There's the family village. If there is some sort of sport, like we've just alluded to with netball, they have a club, you know, that has a village, you know, that can lean in and ask just while they're in the middle of doing something physical, how are you doing? And I think a teen will react a lot better to, they're in the middle of, you know, just coming off a netball or soccer field and somebody asks them, how you doing? They're likely to get a real answer and be caught a little bit unawares. You know, they're not being forced to sit in front of the psychologist, you know, and answer questions that they might not be ready for. Yeah, I suppose the village builds. For my son, he goes to a youth group. So he went on the youth camp over Christmas, and that has forged a new soccer team for him with other people from that group. So there's only one step that needs to be taken, and then there's often a follow through.
When a family member or part of your teen's close circle passes away, we often expect grief. But our teens, remember, are part of many larger communities, and we don't want to assume that a close relationship is the only one that will trigger grief for our teens. When someone in a teen's broader community has passed away, if you're a youth leader, teacher, or a coach, you may want to work with the whole community to support teens to process their emotions. I often recommend 6 things. The first one is take action. Really, that's just being observant and looking for opportunities to check in with teens. The second thing is to prioritize communication. So don't be afraid to ask open-ended questions like, how are you feeling? Or even direct questions like, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 today? Or do you need to see a counselor? But if they don't feel like talking, don't push them. My third one is find times to allow them to talk and share memories if they want to. The fourth is listen without judgment. Then encourage connectedness. This is so important. Ask your teens if there is one step they can take today to keep a connection with another important person or other people around them to maintain their well-being. Spending small amounts of time doing positive things is also helpful. And then finally, suggest options to get extra help, like the school counsellor, a chaplain, or their GP. So it's trying to support our teens, just finding that one person then to connect in with, and then perhaps that person includes them in a choir or a netball team or whatever it might be. And so it sounds like you're a big believer in just those little bits of the village are the start of the village, or those first few people are the start of the village, and then it grows into a greater village. And I think then it comes back to us giving our teens permission to talk to other people besides us, that because that is so helpful and so supportive. Those people are so supportive for them. I'm thinking also we have quite a few listeners who are principals and teachers at schools. What advice do you have for schools and high school teachers? How can they support a teen who is grieving?
That's a great question. My son's school community was brilliant. Obviously, every teacher is going to have their own journey as to how much they want to support the children that sit before them in a class. But the one that stood out, my son would come home and talk about every week. And I tried to identify, what is this teacher doing that's different to all the others? My son has expressed his grief in being the class clown. So instead of disciplining him, sending you out of the room, you're a disturbance, this teacher actually saw him, and he saw the layers and asked him to come and sit down the front with him because he loved having conversation with him so much that he wanted to be closer to him. So he changed his turn of phrase around how he spoke to the person that was causing the chaos in the room, understood that a teenage boy is always going to want to have more fun than work, and accepted that, saw him. You would look at a girl completely differently, but the acceptance, the seeing, and then the encouraging, I think, was what that teacher did that stood out, and then included other kids in the framework, and so drew other kids into the encouragement. So I think giving that opportunity for the voice that wants to speak, even in silliness, to be heard, but turn it into, a little bit of silliness, but then control it in a way that is not, I don't see you, I just am reacting, and here's the school rules and here's the discipline. I really appreciated that teacher seeing my son. And of course, a teacher that doesn't want to go down that track could possibly just refer. They might see and then refer to the school chaplain, counsellor, psychologist, whatever resources the school might have to support them. But I think the relationship between teacher and student is going to actually do more good than anything.
And I think you've just highlighted there again how grief is going to look so different for different teenagers. Whether you're the class clown or you withdraw or you start to become a little bit rebellious or backchat, it's going to look quite different. And it's those creative teachers who will look at those and interpret them for what they are, that there's something else going on underneath. And if we listen to what you've spoken about in terms of the process of grief, for some of those teens, that could last for 2 years. It could maybe only come out 2 years down the track or 5 years down the track, because their grief process is so different. And so we need to just have on our radar, I think, as educators, that if a teenager lost a loved one a year ago or 2 years ago, that might only be coming up now in year 11 for the first time. So that's so important, I think. I just want to go back where I was talking about what people shouldn't do. You were going to talk about what people can do in grief. Tell us a little bit about what people can do.
Okay. So what can people do to help someone? The biggest word is turn up, know the person, listen to the person. Don't feel rejected. Ask open-ended questions. As I said, stay away if you don't feel like you're ready, even yourself. I know some people that were my friends that were going through their own breakdowns, their own losses. They were not in a specific place to even help me, but just a few words of condolence, is enough to know that that person's reachable. I think my greatest learning in the last 16 months about the do's is just be who you normally are to that person. So if they're someone that always turns up on the doorstep, then keep turning up. Help that person feel consistently normal in this chaotic world. In my chaplaincy, the people that I have helped a lot on the sidelines of a court, some of them were coaches and they had husbands dying in hospital, and all they wanted was to turn up at netball, to coach netball, and that was the fun part of their week that made them feel normal. But that just took a little bit of education to the people around them to be able to say, this is not the time to ask her questions about her husband. This is her distraction. This is her fun part of the week. Let's make her feel as normal as possible. And if people get a little bit of guidance that's not telling them how to do it, but just what not to do, then they can turn up and be their normal self as well.
And, we often see people cooking meals and so on. You spoke about, for you, flowers weren't helpful. Were meals helpful to you?
Yes. I forget about all the consistent things that I had given to me as a real blessing. The first thing that happened is I had my two best girlfriends that don't live anywhere near me send me a text and say, we're moving into an apartment just around the corner from your home, and we're going to stay there for a week. And when you need us, we're going to call you at 9 o'clock every morning and ask what you need. And then we will just turn up. They became my little centurions at the front door because we had 80 deliveries within 3 days. They turned it into a game. Who was going to get to the front door first? They made me laugh, in the midst of it. Those two people then had reached out to my Bible study group from my church, and then meals were then organised. Between the 7 months that we were on this journey, we had probably 6 months of meals covered and delivered every day to our home. Our village is quite large, so we had a lot of different people that wanted to be invested, and everyone wanted to know what they could do. So there is such thing as, in Australia, there's such a thing called meal train. I don't know what that would be called, but it's something that you can actually organise meals where you actually know what the family likes to eat and how much food they need. Because I can tell you the one mistake that was made around food was we got too much too fast and our freezer couldn't hold it. And then we cried over all these people's beautiful food that was spoiling. So there's things that we do in love.
Very practical things.
Yeah, just practical. Bit like the flowers. It's like, send me flowers in a year's time. I'm going to love them so much more than on the day that my daughter's passed, because that's just tragic. That's what those flowers look like to me. And no one realises that in 2 or 3 days those flowers die and you've got to throw them out. You feel like your child's dying all over again. So they were the real feelings that came, and then you felt guilty that people were spending a lot of money on you, because I can tell you when a child passes, the flower arrangements are huge. And we had to go send someone to a department store to get huge vases because the vases I had in my home couldn't hold them. That then became a problem that someone else had to deal with. So I think the food, having people, really close friends, come and just stake out at your home for a week, they were all really helpful things, because then they could control the well-meaning people that wanted to turn up with baked goods that really wasn't their turn to come just yet. Because you make your world very small when something like this happens, and you really can only cope with a few people at a time, because you are dealing with funeral directors and ministers and people that are talking to you about a very serious event, and you're planning a funeral. For Amy, we had a Thanksgiving service. That whole week for me was not about anything else but doing the best event I had ever organised in my life. And so the only people that got let in the door were those people that could support me in that event, and everybody else had to wait their turn. So I was controlling that once people got Raewyn's in event mode, we're going to support her in what she needs. So my poor friends were running around finding easels and, whatever Raewyn wanted, Raewyn got that week, which was really nice.
So Raewyn, what is your hope or your vision for your future?
I think hope is everything. Hope for my future comes from two things. It comes from learning from my past and living in the actual present And that gives me the hope for the future. And in going back to my past, I'm able to reflect on my own experiences, what has given me strength in the past. I have a faith, and that has brought me assurance and joy that sustains me, and the assurance that I'll see my child again in heaven. It helps me keep smiling, even though I feel pain every morning when I wake up. It gives me purpose because I feel like I am now her hands and her feet on earth, and I'm looking for ways in creating a legacy, in moving forward, for both using Amy's gifts and my gifts together.
I found Raewyn's reminder so helpful that grief will be different for every person and that we shouldn't be afraid to ask what they need, but then also not to be offended if what we instinctively offer may not be what they need at the time. If you would like to find out more about Raewyn and her work, you can go to her Instagram at Raewyn Elsegood or go to sportschaplaincy.com.au. You can also find me at raisingteens.au. And if you have a question about raising your teen, please contact me via email or my Facebook page at Collett Smart. If you found this episode helpful or gained some useful insight from it, please subscribe and review wherever you get your podcasts, and consider sharing it with friends and family. I hope to see you next episode, but in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 103.2. Thanks for listening.